Before you move on, before you assume this is just another China versus America story, slow down for a second. Because what's happening right now is not loud, not aggressive, and not announced with breaking news alerts. But it may end up redefining how the global economy works for the next generation. America is quietly moving its manufacturing out of China, not all at once, not with speeches, not with dramatic exits, but piece by piece, factory by factory, decision by decision. And the silence around this shift is intentional. Loud exits create panic, quiet exits create permanence. On the surface, everything still looks normal. Stores are full, products still say made in China, trade numbers still look massive. But behind closed doors, something fundamental has changed. The question American companies are now asking is no longer how cheap is China, but what happens if China suddenly isn't available? That single question has altered the entire calculation. For decades, China was the perfect solution. Cheap labor, massive scale, efficient logistics, and political stability that favored manufacturing growth. It became the world's factory because it made sense. But systems don't break when they're weak. They break when they're stressed. And stress arrived in waves. First came the trade war, then the pandemic, then lockdowns that froze entire cities, then chip restrictions, tech bans, sanctions, and growing military tension. Automakers couldn't finish cars because a single chip was missing. Shelves went empty in the richest country on earth, not because demand exploded, but because production was stuck thousands of miles away under someone else's rules. That moment changed the mindset permanently. From that point on, China was no longer just a partner. It became a risk concentration. And risk is something corporations and governments are trained to reduce quietly. So, the shift began not with exits, but with backups. One factory in Vietnam, one supplier in Mexico, one assembly line in India. At first, it looked insignificant. But over time, it became a pattern. This isn't deglobalization. It's re-engineering. China is no longer the center of the system. It's becoming one option among many. Now here's where the story goes deeper. This isn't just corporate behavior. The US government is actively shaping this move. Through subsidies, tax credits, and strategic laws, Washington is nudging companies in a very specific direction. Semiconductors, batteries, defense equipment, pharmaceuticals, energy components, these are no longer treated as normal goods. They're treated as national security assets. And national security assets cannot depend on a geopolitical rival. That's the logic driving everything. Making advanced chips in China is now seen as dangerous. Relying on Chinese supply chains for military or medical equipment is considered unacceptable. So instead of ordering companies to leave China, the US changed the incentives. Stay too dependent, and you lose access to subsidies. Move production closer to home or to allies, and you're rewarded. This is how power operates in the modern world, not through commands, but through economic gravity. Let me stop here and ask you something directly, because this is where most people miss the real meaning. If the country that benefited the most from globalization starts quietly pulling critical industries back toward itself and its allies, what does that tell you about how safe the global system really is? This shift is expensive, slow, and messy. Factories don't move overnight. Workers need training. Infrastructure takes years. That's why you don't see headlines screaming about it. But once supply chains start moving, they rarely go back. And China knows this. That's why it's pushing self-reliance, domestic consumption, and independent tech development. What you're witnessing is not a breakup announced in public, but a quiet separation where both sides pretend nothing is wrong while preparing for a future where they rely on each other far less. And this matters to you more than you might realize. When manufacturing shifts, prices change. When supply chains fragment, inflation behaves differently. Some countries benefit massively, like India, Vietnam, Mexico. Others lose leverage. The global economy becomes less efficient but more resilient. Stability decreases, volatility increases. This is the trade-off. And here's the human side of this story. Every major economic transition feels invisible while it's happening. The real question is how far this quiet shift will go and whether the world can handle a future where the two largest economies on Earth are deeply connected. If this video made you pause, think, or see global trade from a new angle, then this channel is built exactly for you. Subscribe, because we break down the silent moves that shape your future long before they show up in headlines. And trust me, this quiet manufacturing shift is only the beginning.